Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to An-Nisa Collective podcast with me, your host, Dr. Samia Hussain. And today I have with me live on air two very familiar voices to An-Nisa Collective, Farhana and Maryam. Farhana, assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
And Maryam, assalamu alaikum.
عليكم السلام.
I hope you're both doing well, inshallah. I'm really glad you're here because we're going to be talking about a very important topic, that of Palestine, and in particular, looking at Gaza, looking at the Ummah's response. And one of the things I wanted to start with, which has really been, I've been thinking about it a lot in my mind, is how within the last couple of weeks in particular, I really feel that the Ummah's response has significantly shifted and moved to a new territory, not completely new, but definitely something that wasn't a widespread call before. So, for example, in the last couple of weeks, I've seen Muslim scholars calling for military intervention to solve the issues in Palestine. And that call has been taken up by the masses. So I saw a massive protest in Bangladesh, in its capital, Dhaka, of millions of people calling for military intervention. And then that was followed quickly on by Pakistan. And although these kind of calls were kind of weak and feeble in the past, now they seem to be taken the front stage. Like I remember in the past, a lot of the protests were calling for just ending the war or calling for just a ceasefire. But that's really progressed now, to calling for military intervention. But also, like when we look away from the masses and look at individuals or even look at organizations, there are some new developments. Like, for example, in Britain in particular, the latest legal application by Riverway Law, to the Home Secretary challenging the decision to ban and proscribe Hamas, for example. And again, I'm sure there are many people in the Ummah who have high hopes and maybe expectations from that to try and ease the pressures and the problems that are going on in the Middle East. But then also individuals, like I've seen, for example, recently Ibtihal Abu Saad, who, stood up at the 50th anniversary of Microsoft, you know, uh, critiquing them for their involvement in the genocide. And that obviously took a lot of courage and a lot of bravery, and she knew exactly what she was doing. But that level of sacrifice where she knew that her job was at stake, she knew that probably she's going to have to be deported or, her citizenship may be revoked. I'm not sure what her citizenship status is actually, but she did it because of her conscience didn't allow her to be playing any part in this genocide. And as soon as she found out that the company was complicit, she stood up with a bang, like she didn't just do it quietly. She made sure people knew about it. And then, even non-Muslims, like I just saw recently Gary Lineker, critiquing the BBC for its coverage of what's happening in Palestine, in particular speaking for the, innocent Palestinian children. So I think on multiple levels, whether we look at individual levels or, group levels or mass, global level, there has been a shift. There's been a kind of increased willingness to sacrifice. How do you think we've got here? But also more importantly, like, do you think that this is now the pathway forward? Do you think the Ummah's evolved because we are seeing this live genocide happening in front of us? And unfortunately, if that's what it took for the Ummah to kind of change, at least alhamdulillah, the Ummah is beginning to think differently and is beginning to look at this seriously and willing to sacrifice things that they wouldn't maybe be prepared to sacrifice before. They're willing to go out their comfort zone. I mean, how do you think we got here, and how significant do you think it is that we are here in terms of trying to get to an end to this conflict and end to this genocide and actually further, like liberating Palestine?
Um, okay. I think that the last 16 months have been really horrific and really traumatic, and I think everybody would agree with that.
Mm.
And I think that from a personal experience, and I do feel that a lot of people share this as well, is the fact that, to be engaged in this kind of situation, plugged into your phone, and you're basically watching a live genocide, mass murder, mass slaughter, whatever you want to call it, taking place day in, day out, and just watching the pictures that are just flooding in from Gaza is it does have an effect on you in terms of your mental capacity. And I think that anybody who has been able to stay in the field, as they say, and even if they feel helpless or despair, the fact that they have continued to engage in what has come out has to be commended, because it shows that they care. And I think one of the first things that we have to say is the fact that people care. Yeah. I think the second thing is the fact that has now transformed into another group of people from within that pool a group of people that have actually taken action. So whether that's protests, whether that's boycotting, whether that's calling for a ceasefire, putting a job on the line, your activities on social media, just speaking the truth, basically, just speaking the truth and just saying things as it is. That again has to be commended. And the fact that there are people that have been doing that like nonstop since this whole situation started and they found out what was going on also has to be commendable. I think that what makes the situation different in this specific period is that when you have a so-called ceasefire, I'm going to call it a so-called ceasefire because they killed around 150. The Zionist entity killed around 150 human beings in that space of a month that they had this so-called ceasefire. And since this alleged ceasefire has been broken, we're looking at the official numbers being around 2,000, but we know that these are not the official numbers. Forget the actual total number, which people are saying is probably around a couple of 100,000. Astaghfirullah. I think that when you have any kind of break there's a level of respite and you kind of your senses kind of calm down. You start to your blood pressure drops. There is a I'm not talking about relaxing, but I'm talking about it's a period of time to sort of sit and wait and think. And then so when the ceasefire was broken on the 18th of March, and I specifically remember that day, waking up that day to 400. The body count that day was 400. It's like it's a shock. It's like somebody has shocked the system. And so it was like a Hind Rajab moment again, when you hear something like that, and then obviously close to that time, it was the massacre of those of the paramedics,
Yeah.
the clear-cut assassination of aid workers, and they were trying to cover it up until they found the phone, which basically recorded one of these aid workers who was basically asking for his mum's forgiveness and the fact that he
Rifat.
knew what he was getting himself. Rifat, yeah, subhanallah. And just the way in which that it was so degrading, like they assassinated them. That was caught on the camera, that was caught on the phone, recorded on the phone. And then they dug a shallow grave for them. They dumped the bodies. And then they even tried to dump the 8 trucks as well. It was so disgusting. It was so disgusting that the mainstream media had to report it. And even then, even more disgusting was when they tried to still play around with the words. And, so, there's only so much you're expecting the people to take, honestly. Yeah. There's only so much that you're expecting people to take. And then since then, burning, how many women and children have been burnt? Just the other day when there was the image of the fetus that the Zionist entity has not even spared the tiny fetus inside the mother's womb. It had a bullet wound
straight to the heart.
Straight to the heart. Subhanallah. So I think, look, there's only so much that people are going to be willing to accept. And also, I think that there is a level of, like a full circle. So I do remember right at the beginning, there was a quiet voice, you could say, a quiet voice that was talking about the responsibility on the scholars in Islam. There was a responsibility on the governments in the Muslim country, the military in the Muslim countries. What's going on, basically, because we're talking about a state level, a state to state. This is how you have to deal with these things. And because I think that the Muslim community in general have been so neglected by our own governments. Even, I mean, people are trying to flee these countries and come to the West, for goodness sake, that it was almost like we're just going to ignore them and we're just not going to talk about them. And this is pretty much what's happened for over a year and a half. And that's why I think all these other things came out, the ceasefire, the boycott, been which have been successful in their own right. However, what has not been successful is the fact that you are able to slaughter 400 people in one day, and you can't do anything except to see that on the phone. And so, therefore, when you start, reiterating the same things again, which is,
The same mantra of
the same
charity,
mantra, yeah,
yeah,
doesn't
charity,
work.
dua, and
Doesn't
boycott.
work. Yeah.
Let's look at these now in a bit more detail because I think you're right. I mean, this situation in Palestine has been ongoing, not just from, October 7th, 2023. I mean, we have seen violence in that area that predates, that by 100 years, and every time there is an outbreak of escalation of violence in this area, the Ummah does respond. We do have this consciousness that Al-Aqsa is very important for us, from our Aqidah. Al-Aqsa is mentioned in the Quran, just like Mecca is, right? The Kaaba there. So we do have this consciousness, and the Ummah has never failed to respond. Um, it's just now how the response is being tailored according to the unfolding of events, right? And like you're saying, this ability to step out for a short time and really think about the fact that, look, if you're doing the same thing over and over again and nothing's changing, in fact, the only thing that's changing is it's getting worse, then surely we have to be looking at this differently and doing something else. But if we go back and my generation in particular, charity has been something that has been championed during these times. And alhamdulillah, the Ummah is very generous, and we are generally able to, raise a lot of funds. Okay, but in my generation in particular, what people have begun to realize and woken up to is the fact that it doesn't matter how much money we raise, the situation is getting worse. But now also because of social media and the fact that we're a bit more clued up, we know that none of that money is actually getting in, right? So we could be raising a load of money, but the borders are shut. Even a bottle of water can't get in. It was Ramadan recently, and it's like they're fasting anyway, really, because they're not able to really get access to food and water. So the Ummah is definitely waking up because they're having these realizations that no matter what we're doing, it's just not good enough. It's not. So if we look at even boycotting, for example, because this was something quite new, I would say, to this particular episode since October 7th, boycotting was a really big thing. And I think, Miriam, particularly in your generation, boycotting is something that people have really championed. I mean, um, how effective do you think that is, and how do people in your generation view boycotting in the bigger scheme of things?
I think the BDS movement has been around for a while, and I think generally, like a lot of Muslims were aware of, like, don't buy Coca-Cola, that kind of thing. But post October 7th, 2023, I found that a lot of people in my generation have woken up and started thinking critically about everything that they purchase, all the media they consume. They start thinking critically about the news that they're watching. People are picking apart headlines and looking at, the bias that comes with mainstream news, and we're relying on social media more for our news now. And I think that's definitely something positive that has come out of it, is that people are thinking more about what they're doing. And boycotting is a massive movement at the moment, and I'd say it is mostly young people that are championing it, and who are aware of it and are actively researching and telling people which companies to boycott, and spreading the word about it. You go to the shops, you'll see like young people putting stickers on like different products in Morrison's, for example. And it's interesting because if you look at the reasons as to why companies are considered boycott worthy, well, before I say that, actually, in terms of how effective boycotting actually is, it varies. I mean, you've seen like different results in terms of, like, for example, Starbucks and Zara in like Muslim countries. But here in the UK, you don't really see much of a difference because people are going to still, do what they want. But if you look at why these companies are being boycotted, it's because, they've had some form of support for Israel. They have stores in Israel, they have factories, they have suppliers from there, they've sent money, they have offices. Any company that has any sort of history with Israel, or even like movies or TV shows that have actors that are associated with Israel, they'll get boycotted. And it's interesting because this energy that young people are putting into that, they are not putting into looking at the government, because the government is the biggest business that has backed and funded Israel. And they're the ones who created Israel in the first place. They stole Palestine and gave it to the Zionists way back in the early 1900s. And, I feel like with the boycotting movement, we're missing the main point of it. It's not just to close down companies, it's to, create a bigger impact. So the fact that people in my generation are still begging the government to intervene and to facilitate another ceasefire is kind of disappointing. And, it's been a long time now. It's been a year and a half since then. And, I think people are kind of scrambling and looking for answers as to what else they can do.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, Farhana, you mentioning how, whatever financial deficit is produced by the boycotting, a lot of the Muslim regimes just fill that bill, they make up the difference. So actually, in the wider context and the bigger picture, boycotting hasn't really made that much difference. Although, I think people get very excited, for example, when they see KFC is shutting down across the Muslim world. So I've seen footage on social media of in Pakistan, for example, where people will be quite vocal and go into the KFC outlets and account the customers and say, how can you buy from here, knowing that the funds that are collected from these franchises are going to support Israel directly. And of course, there was this thing on social media as well about how in the very beginning, KFC supplied free meals to IDF soldiers, right? So people have been very vocal about this, and people also feel a level of satisfaction when they see that it is having some kind of impact in the form of these outlets shutting down, or there being some kind of economic knocking effect, right, on these kind of institutions. But I mean, how much difference, like I said, is it really going to make? And why is it that as an ummah we put or we channel our moral energy, we channel our humanitarian energy into these kind of avenues? I think sometimes when I stand back and look at ourselves as an ummah, I think, we really invest a lot of our eggs in various different baskets. But there is no strategic thinking involved. It's a response. It's like a knee-jerk response, right? So it's like it completely escapes the brain. It just goes to the spinal cord. That's what we say in medicine. Like a knee-jerk response is when you hit the kneecap, it sends messages to your spinal cord. It doesn't have to go all the way up to the brain, and it goes back into the muscle and it makes it flinch, right? And I just feel that that's what's happening, that we see what's happening in Palestine. We've been seeing it. I mean, me and you have been seeing it for decades now, right? Obviously, it predates all of this. It's been happening for 100+ years. And every time it's like a knee-jerk response. The newest, obviously, being the boycotting. The other thing was the ICJ and the ICC, which again, many people had expectations from, and then only to end up with Netanyahu being able to travel to Hungary. We've seen the student sit-ins, the encampments at various universities, only to now see how some of the students are now being deported in the States. So the most recent one was Mahmoud Khalil, who led the student protests at Columbia University. And despite having a green card and his wife being a full citizen of the United States, he is now being deported. So, I mean, what do you think is going through the Ummah's mind when they start channeling their energies into these various different projects, or and their expectations from it?
I think, look, you have to know what you want first of all, to decide what action am I going to take to get to what I want. And I think that there is a confusion, I think, in what it is that we want out of all this, because I think initially it was a ceasefire and hashtag Free Palestine. And a ceasefire, I remember very early on, I was a Jewish professor, a professor at SOAS, anti-Zionist, and he was saying that we don't want a ceasefire because a ceasefire means that the fire will just start again, you know. And I thought that was such a, in that moment as well, such a profound thing that he said, while the ceasefire call was huge at that time. And then it was, everything was hashtag free Palestine, free Palestine, free Palestine. You see it everywhere. And I understand the sentiment. However, it's a very general phrase. What does it actually mean? Free Palestine. And then people were starting talking about 2-state, 1-state, no state. I mean, these are the different things that people are talking about. And so if you're not clear on what the objective is, then for a solution, I'm talking about as a Muslim, what the Islamic objective is for a Muslim, then you're going to be very confused as to how to move forward with this. And also you're going to think of each action, each action is going to be sort of haphazard. So, if you believe that that you want to free Palestine and you think that boycotting is somehow going to lead to that, you haven't understood geopolitics, and you haven't understood foreign policy, and you haven't understood the way that the military-industrial complex works in the world, right? If you're
why this problem's happening in the first place.
Why the problem's happening in the first place. So in Allah's wisdom, I guess this is that fact that He has allowed this to take place for so long, and it's continuing. And so many times in between, in this journey, we've had discussions at home about, they're definitely going to call for, they're going to stop this now, they're going to call for ceasefire now, because they can't allow this to go on. Because the West won't allow this to go on, because it's actually damaging their image, and it's damaging their interests. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed this massacre to continue. And actually one of the things that has happened is, one of the things that have been successful, even though maybe this was not the aim, is actually to put Palestine on the map. And this definitely has done. Palestine has been on the map. That's the first thing. Second thing is about the way that colonialism has been exposed, i.e. it's linked to capitalism. It's just a new version of colonialism and its agenda. And the fact that it's actually exposed the West and the regimes in the Muslim world, and how interlinked they are, and how much they rely on them, in fact, and how they bribe them, and how they have got them in their pockets in order to carry out this massacre, and in order to have this entity to survive. So even though maybe that wasn't the objective by doing all of these things, this is actually what's happened. And I think, subhanAllah, in a way, you could say that because of the fact that it's exposed all of these things, without it being the thing that they hope to happen, it's actually led to the situation that we have now, which is where you have Asma Qureshi writing a letter, writing an article. Where are the scholars? Where do the scholars fit in all of this? That's a big thing that he did. It's huge, actually. This is why you have now like groups like Pal Action, who have really taken on momentum, because it's like, okay, we need to think about how we're gonna, this is like removing the munkar, like with your hand, basically. And so people are now start thinking, how is that going to translate to the Muslim world in the circumstances that they are living in? And that's why now then the fatwa came out about the fact that this is a responsibility on the Muslim armies, the trained armies, that they are the ones that have to that are supposed to be protecting their people, And so all of this has allowed this unraveling now to take place, where who are these regimes? How much? Where is the real power? Are they really independent, or are they just colonies? The borders, nationalism. I mean, there's a lot there, obviously, to unpack. I know we can't do this in this one recording, but it's actually allowed all of this. So I don't like to get into these discussions about, is a boycott going to work or not work? Because actually, in that collective effort, without that being the primary objective, alhamdulillah, we are actually at this stage
something
now.
Positive. Yeah, something positive came out of it. I mean, I'm speaking about, you mentioned, the fact that this is a colonial project, and speaking about political, within the political framework. One of the places that the Ummah invested a lot of their energy recently was the elections. And Miriam, your generation in particular would have been targeted because the government knows that people who are older, they generally don't change their mind about who they're going to support. Yeah, but it's the young people that are yet to make up their mind. And Palestine was very much on the agenda for the election campaigns of various different political entities, and it led to many Muslims promoting this idea of strategic voting, and leading to people suggesting that, as Muslim voters, we should be voting for independent candidates, or we should be voting for X, Y, or Z. What did your social circles make of that? What did people your age make of this, you know, their use of their, ballot ticking exercise linked to the solution for Palestine?
I think there was a really big push, you're right, on young people to get involved in politics, because generally, like, people around my age, for context, for the listeners, I'm 23, people around my age have generally abstained from voting or just not been very interested. So it was definitely a big push. Like, on social media, there were so many like adverts and a lot of like partnerships with like influencers and stuff like that. People begging us to vote. But people my age generally feel a bit hard done by the government. It's a running joke with us all that the government hates us because they've essentially screwed us over in so many different aspects. Our education, the job market, the current cost of living, us coming out of education and into the world, it's all completely messed up, and there's basically no hope for us at the moment. And so we generally don't have much faith in the government. However, I feel like there's two sides to this with my generation. There's firstly people who, believe that the answers do come from the government, and the way to make change is to vote. Hence why there was a big push for vote the Tories out, vote Labour in, or vote for independent parties. People were saying your voice does matter and we should be voting. And then on the other hand, there's people who know that there's no way that this government would ever do anything for us, let alone for Palestine. Just look at the country that we're living in today and the state of it. The NHS, the roads, the job market. There's so much to complain about, and the idea that the government would ever dream of helping Palestine, just because we're asking them to, is, that doesn't make sense. So there is a divide in my generation because of that, and I think, we need to stop relying on this system for help when it comes to stuff like this. Like I mentioned earlier, my generation, taking part, for example, in protests, begging the government for a ceasefire, asking the government, which is facilitating all of this in the first place, seems kind of nonsensical.
I mean, that brings me to the next point, which is how much is that generation aware of the wider picture of the role that the British government played in orchestrating the situation that we see right now in Palestine? Because me and you, we did a podcast on this before when we looked at the elections, and we were talking about how essentially to participate within this political system is all about just making the pendulum swing one way or the other within a very closed system. So when we look at understanding how British politics works, it swings between Labour and Tory. That's generally what it is. So the natural resting place for this country is for the Tories to be in government. Okay, so it's that the whole age-old landlords are the ones that dictate, and then the peasants have to just, feed off the little grains of whatever it is that they're given to eat, right? But then people get upset after a while because there's only so long that you can eat little bits, right? And people start getting upset, and then they air their grievances, and then the system allows them to let off that pressure by allowing Labour to come into power. And then when Labour comes into power, traditionally, that is when a lot of the big decisions are made. The big political decisions are made. And then when people's grievances kind of reduce a little bit, Tories come back into power and enact the decisions that were made under the Labour government. They're able to blame the Labour government when things then go wrong. And it literally is this pendulum that just keeps swinging between the left and the right. It was very odd for Lib Dems to come quite close. But again, they formed a coalition government. They've never really been government on their own because the resting place generally is between Labour and Tory. And I think anyone who sits back and I would encourage particularly people in your generation to sit back and really study and understand what the political system is really made up of and how it works, because um, anybody who knows how it works will be able to tell you that, look, it's a closed system. It's only going to swing between left and right. Okay. You may be able to get a few independent candidates voted in, but that's not going to really make a difference on the overall picture and the overall decision, because at the end of the day, it's a system that has certain seats, and they will be the ones voting, and the number one aim of the political system is to protect its own interests. And when we understand it in that context, and we look back at the role that Britain had to play in creating the state of Israel, well, straight away then we can tell that, okay, well, look, this is why they're not really lifting up a finger to do much in solving this situation and liberating the innocent people from occupation. They're not really interested in that, because the whole point they got involved in the first place so many years ago was in order to create a thorn in the Middle East so that they can have access, their gateway, through the Mediterranean Sea, through what is Palestine today, into their colony of India and other places, right? So this was their political agenda and their political interest, their economic interest in that region. And so to come to their doorstep and beg for a solution for Palestine, it really is futile. And I just wonder how many people in that generation, even in our generation, to be honest, Rahana, I mean, let's be honest, like it's only recently, I think, that many people in our generation have really taken efforts to study the history and the role that various different European countries had to play in creating the situation. And, we can go all the way back to Sykes-Picot, but even before that, go back to the Imperial Conference of 1907, only to realize that, look, there were big, big plans, okay, that were very carefully orchestrated and enacted in order to produce the situation that we are seeing right now. And this is why and I'm rubbing my head against you guys, that it's really frustrating sometimes to see us, a good-natured ummah, who are meaning very well, whose hearts are attached to one another. And this is why we feel for Palestine from the very beginning. It's not just from October 7th. Like, the ummah has been connected to Palestine for a very long time. And those positive emotions that we have for one another, it's often channeled into empty baskets or often misdirected. It is purposefully hijacked and steered in a direction that's going to take us far away from ever seeing a free Palestine. And this is, I think this is what the frustrating part is, that because when we see all of these energies being channeled into voting, into charity, into boycotting, into student sit-ins, into all these other things that we've been talking about, including, having high hopes from the ICC and ICJ. It just feels like, look, we're doing all of this without really thinking about why this is happening in the first place. And that's why when we do all of this and knock and beg at the doors of the ones who actually created the situation, it feels very embarrassing, I'll be honest. It feels like come on, we really need to see the situation for what it is, and come up with a coordinated and strategized response, because a response, like we have seen through experience, is just not good enough. Any response, although it's good that people are responding because it shows, it reflects, the emotions, it
I think
reflects the
it's
care.
the first step.
Yeah.
This what I was saying earlier, which is that to actually care and to actually get up off your seats and actually get out the door and actually attend something or listen to something, or do you see what I mean? That's like a step. That's the first step. And once you're there, that's it. You're now ready to absorb. So that is a good step.
Yeah.
You know,
But then how far
want...
does that how far does that need to be taken? So, for example, people may be asking the question now, do we all have to be like Ibtihal Abu Saad, who really stepped outside her comfort zone, really knew what she was sacrificing?
Look, some people, yeah.
You go on, Farhan. I think there was
Look,
a delay.
there's a couple of things.
Yeah.
So going back to the what you were saying initially was the fact that I think it's an African proverb. The master will never give his slave tools to bring down the master's house. And you only really understand these kind of little proverbs, and there's many like that, by the way. You only really understand these things when you're actually faced with a situation where you realize, oh, am I the slave? Have I just been given the master's tools, and these tools are in no way, no shape or form ever going to actually bring down the master's house? It can put in a few dents and knocks and whatever, but it's never actually going to bring down the master's house. So all of these tools that we've been given, i.e. the protests, all these styles and means basically to like show our distaste and our anger and our hatred towards what's going on in the world. These are avenues that have been given to us, that have been okayed by the British government, that you can take in order to let out your steam, let out your anger, let out your frustrations. And actually, it's the same kind of strategy that they've used in the Muslim world as well. So it's well known, like countries like Egypt, Jordan, they'll allow some protests. Maybe not now with Sisi in power, but definitely before when Mubarak was there, they would actually orchestrate the protests, and they would actually even say to some of these groups, over there, like, do it, because people are angry and they need to vent their anger. Yeah. And in the West, generally, people are very complacent until the government makes a decision that's going to basically irritate people, like the war in Iraq and now what's happening with Palestine. So, these are, even though they are a nuisance, actually, they know that it's never really going to actually put an end to this genocide, like you said at the beginning. But I still stick with that. It has actually moved us forward in some way. So I think what I'm trying to get, the main point I'm trying to get at is that these are tools that have been given to us. And until we start looking at okay, they are trying to distract us from actually thinking outside the box, actually breaking free of this cage. Even decolonial studies, because they know that as time has moved on and now we have internet and we have books and people are free to educate themselves, there is even a program called decolonial studies. So it's a way to give people access to how to decolonize themselves, but even that is within a framework that
that disables us,
impact, really. That doesn't impact what is happening now, right? And I think what's happening now is that more and more people are actually breaking free of that. They are actually seeing the Western imperial world order, as you would say, for what it is, basically. That this is actually the world that we've been living in. Why have they created this war on terror? Why is there so much double standards when it comes to Ukraine and Russia, and it comes to the Zionist entity and land of Palestine? What is all this interference in the Middle East?
Yeah.
Why do they keep putting their feet in everything? What is actually going on?
But I think this realization, one of the things it has done, when I speak to people, they come and they say, oh, okay, if this is the case, oh my God, what more can we do? And one of the things I was saying is that, look, I think we need to look at this differently. It's not about what we can do. It's the same as when in a medical scenario, you've got somebody hemorrhaging. Nobody asks, from the staff, what can I do? What needs to
They
be,
just do.
Yeah, because they know
exactly.
They know what needs to be done.
They know what needs to be done,
right?
Yeah.
So the question isn't what more can I do, because people have reached this kind of fatigue now, yeah, because it's very tiring, day after day to organize charitable events. I mean, I've been part of a few charity events, and I've seen the fatigue, right? And Ramadan, all it was really charity events, one after the other, because people want to gain their rewards.
And you don't know where to put your money.
Yeah, exactly, because there's so many places. SubhanAllah, because we're talking about Palestine.
Yeah, and specifically with Palestine, nothing's going in.
Yeah, and people realize
the
that
border is closed. Nothing's going in.
Yeah.
So this is the issue. And you were talking about Ibtihal, may Allah reward her. It's something that I listened to the other day, and the brother on the interview, he was saying that it's this issue of sacrifice.
It's issue of sacrifice.
Yeah, this issue of sacrifice is needed. You have to sacrifice. So whether you are going to sacrifice your job, whether you're going to sacrifice your livelihood, at the end of the day, as Muslims, rizq min Allah, our sustenance comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and whatever He whatever he feels is enough for us, it should be enough for us. Whether we say something or don't say something, this is the thing.
Mhm.
Whether you open your mouth or not, actually, your rizq is set. Do you see what I mean? You could lose your livelihood in a second without you even sacrificing, and by not even speaking any words. That's
Yeah.
the first thing, sacrifice. The second thing is about how do you overcome fear or perceived fear. So it's like if I say something, something might happen, right? Ibtihal, Sister Ibtihal, she did it fi sabilillah. She gave up that position. She gave up, I don't know how much she was getting paid. I think it was a good, she got
Yeah, it must
deported.
have been.
Yeah, she got deported back to Morocco. She has now been offered a job from what I know, from some Kuwaiti,
I think it was Qatari. Yeah.
Qatari. Okay, there you
Yeah.
go. And she didn't do it for that.
Yeah.
She didn't do it on the basis that she knew there was a job waiting for her.
Yeah.
She did it because she didn't know how she was going to face Allah on the Day of Judgment. This is what motivated her to do it. And there are people that have done the same thing, and they haven't landed a job in Qatar.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they're okay with that as well, because once you've overcome the fear, that hurdle, and once you've understood that, you know what, I can sacrifice and I must sacrifice, and non-Muslims are sacrificing, and they do, and this
Yeah.
is humanitarian effort. So for the
Mm.
Muslim, we've got more at stake.
Yeah.
We've got more at stake. We've got more in this. This should be something that we think we don't have the luxury to turn our faces away from this.
Yeah.
So look, sacrifice is needed. The fear factor or perceived fear has to be overcome. We as a community have to do that. And the fact that if you look at the people in Palestine, because my husband, his my husband is Palestinian and he's got family in the West Bank, and even with what's happening in the West Bank, they've lost family members recently and in the past. And there is something that is quite interesting about the character of not all Palestinians, but definitely a majority of them is um, they you know they don't have this the issue of, when it comes to issue of sacrifice, they know that it's not just themselves that they're going to put in trouble. They know this is going to affect their parents, affect their wives, affect their children, affect their families. Yet every single member of that family, inshallah, most likely, more likely than not, they're ready to take that, to take the consequence, to burden the consequence of whatever it is that their son or husband or nephew or grandson is potentially going to do. Yeah. They're not waiting. They're not waiting for who's going to move, who's not going to move. And so, we're in a much more easier position
Mm.
here at the end of the day, So,
Mm.
and I'm not
But
saying, we're not saying to do something reckless. That's not what I'm saying to do.
yeah,
At
yeah.
the same time, how careful, there's only so much careful you're going to be.
I mean, we don't need to even discuss what we need to do individually, because that's something that we can decide for ourselves, isn't it? Like all of us have our own capabilities, we have our own social reach and reach of networks, we have our own potential, we have our own comfort zones. But I think when people start thinking in a different way, so they stop thinking about themselves in that what more can I do, but when they start thinking along the lines of, look, what actually needs to be done,
Needs to be done.
because we want an end to this, right?
Mm.
I think this is a great place to start when we're having this conversation, now that the Ummah's at the level where, look, we've tried so many different things, we've exhausted all these different avenues. Okay, so we're here now, what more can we do? But then when they realize that, look, it's not about you,
Yeah.
it's about what needs to be done. And
Yeah.
like you were saying earlier, look, what is the end objective here? The end objective here is for Palestine to be liberated, in order for these killings, these massacres to be stopped, there needs to be a state level response, because this
Yeah.
is a state level
Yeah.
aggression, right?
Yeah.
When
State
people,
level aggression, state sanctioned,
yes,
state approved.
globally approved, right? And
Globally
when
approved.
we say that, we're not just talking about Western regimes who are openly complicit in the genocide, but we're also talking about the fact that, look, if you just take out a map and study geography and look at the areas surrounding what is the border of Palestine today, right? They're all Muslim countries, right? So uh, I think you'd have to imagine or get a map in front of you, and you see that, Gaza, Palestine borders with the Mediterranean Sea, and the other countries that border it to the north is Turkey, which is a Muslim country. You've got Syria just above, and then Lebanon, and then you've got Jordan, you've got Egypt, and obviously that's where the Rafah crossing is, the Rafah border. All of these countries are, have high Muslim populations, right? And the people there, day in, day out, clearly want to help Palestine. I mean,
Yeah.
the number of marches, the number of protests, recently, like I was seeing even in Morocco,
Yeah.
how they refused to allow a ship that had, I think, fighter planes or something for Israel.
Yeah.
They were
I
demonstrating.
think there were parts.
Yeah, there are parts, right?
34, something
But
like that.
then the regime themselves sent policemen to beat up these innocent protesters,
Yeah.
right? You look at the Rafah border, many Egyptians are calling for the Rafah border to be opened, only to be silenced and stopped by the regime. You've got people in Turkey demonstrating, and Erdogan, says a lot of things, but in reality, there is no action that leads in any way towards aiding the innocent people who are being, killed day in, day out over there, right? And then you have Jordan as well, right? Where, again, like, from extended family connections that I have, like, there's one who has a farm on the border between Palestine and Jordan, and people were using the farm to cross over to just help because you can literally hear, you can physically hear people calling for help. Because when we talk about these borders, by the way, they're just lines drawn on a map. They're not existent in real life. It's like, I was in a hospital, patients, when we're trying to have a private conversation, we tend to pull the curtains round, but those curtains are not soundproof, and everybody literally on the ward can hear that your so-called private conversation. In the same way, these lines are not really in practice able to shackle people down. It's actually the governments that do that, right? So people were crossing over the farm, and then the government sent police to block the farm. And the person who owned the farm was like frustrated, like, I can't even water my agriculture here. So I had to knock on various different ministry doors, and then he was only allowed 2 hours a day to water his agriculture. Because they're so adamant that they don't want people. So they're physically stopping the people who actually want to go and help. So there are people out there like Ibtihal Abu Saad who are willing to go the extra mile, who are willing to sacrifice. They understand rizq is from Allah. They understand ajr is from Allah. They understand ajal is from Allah. They understand all of these things, and they're willing to fulfill their duty and their responsibility of helping their brother and sister. But then you have the regimes surrounding that area, saying one thing, when on a public platform, but then, in reality, in practice, doing the opposite and actually stopping the people from helping. And I think this has grown the frustration even more, particularly in the Muslim land. I mean, I know here, life is a lot easier, and it's much more difficult for people to get out of their comfort zone just because of the luxuries that we're used to. And, come on, we're living, in a country where Islamic concepts aren't very predominant, right? So even when we know that rizq only comes from Allah, that's not what's being perpetuated in society. Yeah, what the idea that's being spread in society is that if you don't work hard, you're not going to get your grades at A level. If you don't work hard at university, you're not going to get that degree. If you don't work hard at work, you're not going to get promoted. Yeah, this is what's being reinforced. So sometimes the idea that rizq comes from Allah can get a little bit rusty, right? But in the Muslim lands where people have these concepts very crystal clear, they are willing, because I think that's where the fear is overcome. Is when these concepts are really strongly embedded and you have a community around you who reinforce that as well. But then they're being stopped by these regimes. And now I think this is one of the reasons why people are where they are. They are realizing that the biggest obstacle for liberating Palestine is the regimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna. So as you were talking, I was gonna say that look, there's two sides to this. The first side is the fact that the West, the regimes in the Muslim world, these are on one side of the fence, and they have their own interests in this. Yeah, whether it's money, power, land routes, trade, just general control. I mean, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And actually, for them as well, that they do believe in genocide is necessary to protect their interests and to protect their democracy. and to protect their world order. They've done it before, and they're doing it again now. It's just the fact that it's under our eyes, and the reason why the people have gone a bit loopy is the fact that they've been selling this lie since World War II, which is that we have we have something called human rights, we have something called the UN, we have something called international law, la di da di da. You know, the ICJ and ICC. Do you see? So this is why people have been nuts, because you've been selling us a lie when we know that the deep state, essentially the real people that are in power, the elites, the government officials, the top brass of the military, are the ones who really understand the game, and they don't mind that there's killing. The only thing that they are annoyed about is the fact that the cat's out of the bag. The issue. So we're at a critical juncture here, and I think with the Muslim world, my husband went there recently, and he was saying that there's been like the level of brainwashing that's been done through the education system of this of really integrating nationalism within the Muslim identity, right? Jordan first, the love for the homeland, the necessity for the protection of the borders, the fact that we need to securitize Jordan from any kind of Zionist aggression, hiding the fact that the government of Jordan in itself are Zionists. I mean, there's nothing else you can call them, right? And so now you see from people, whether you're seeing on social media and in person as well, and from the protests that have taken place, which have directly called the king and the government and the secret police and the armies. Why are you not doing anything? Yeah. There is a dichotomy. There's a struggle now within, which is that you've told us that we're Jordanian, you told us that this is our nationality, this is our identity, but why is it that I feel this love for these people that are across the border? There's something called Islam, and so that this is the next challenge, I would say, which is that actually I think the Muslim world know what needs to happen, which is that these regimes cannot exist, actually. And I think Azam Tamimi said it in a recent interview as well. Dr. Azam Tamimi, he said that the liberation of Palestine will not happen until the Muslim world has liberated itself.
Yeah,
it's really clear what he means by that. It's very, very clear what he means by that. And the military of the Muslim world will not move under these regimes, under these existing regimes, because these regimes are controlled by Western governments. They don't have permission. And so we are at a critical juncture here. And I think that the outcome is not going to be nice. But I think that we're kind of beyond that now, because if you look at the carnage that's been meted out in Gaza and then the West Bank as well, blood has already been spilt. There is already carnage. There is already a massacre and a disaster going on. So you're not going to be able to overcome this situation in a what's the word? In an amicable way. It's not going to happen. There needs to be a real challenge now that's taken place, and the people have to call for it.
Yeah.
The thing, the people have to call for it. So the people have to decide they have to call for this.
The people have to be brave enough. They have to be brave enough to call for it. They have to also be knowledgeable enough to realize that that is the way forward. And I think this is one of the things. And you're right. I think we need to decolonize our minds from things like nationalism, which really hold people back from liberating not just Palestine, to be honest. I mean, everywhere we look in the Muslim world, there are issues, there are problems, and recently Kashmir, right? In the recent news. But even when you look at Yemen, you look at, so many different places, in the world.
There's a common denominator here, though, which is Muslim.
Yeah.
And so what happens is that you can only pick on these countries for so long, and then people are going to start joining the dots and say, I think people have a problem with Muslims, and I think people have a problem with Islam.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when people get to that level and that stage, and then start asking the question, okay, what are we going to do about this now? What are we going to do about this now? Because this is something that affects us all. I think, inshallah, then that's when conversations can happen, that can lead to us channeling this tremendous amount of energy that we have towards the ummah and this love that we have towards the ummah into something that can actually um, materialize out to be beneficial for the ummah rather than um, just making the situation worse, because that's what we're seeing unfolding in front of us. The situation is just getting, from bad to worse to even more worse to even unthinkably worse. Alhamdulillah, like I think you're right. This is a critical juncture. I think we need to have conversations like this, and I think we need to definitely decolonize our mind. I think our generation and our previous generation more so. I think your generation, Maryam, is pretty uh I wouldn't say decolonized, but I think they're just unaware. So they don't have these inferiority complexes because they've not lived through that. They've not had it drummed into them as severely as our parents' generation, for example, who then subtly drummed it into us a little bit. So our generation was a little bit more reticent in coming out and being very careful. But I think your generation, especially what I've seen from the student sit-ins, um, they're quite unafraid and they're quite vocal in their views. It's just a matter of discussing what the views are and taking it forward from there. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, like as I said before about how my generation is kind of like anti-government because we feel as though, the government has done us dirty. I feel like because of that, we don't have much loyalty, I guess,
Mm,
or like a lot of fear. And so, yeah, people are unafraid to speak out against the government and stuff that we see. Um, I mean, don't get me wrong, like there are, of course, repercussions for that. For example, like I have a friend who was involved in shutting down a arms factory. And as a result of that, she was persecuted by the government and, taken through a really long like court trial. And in the end, she was found guilty. And, now her life is, been thrown upside down. So the government does make examples of people like that. But I feel like my generation has quite a lot of willpower and a lot of energy. And, we feel very passionately about, the Palestinian movement. I think a lot of that comes from social media because, we're a social media age and um, we see so much on there. It's almost impossible to turn your brain off from it. It's almost impossible to turn a blind eye. And so, yeah, as a result of that, I feel like my generation has a lot of passion and energy towards it. And so, yeah.
yeah, and they're seeing the truth unfolding. I think that's the other thing. I think in our generation and the generation before, a lot of these genocides were hidden. People only found out about it much later. But today we're seeing everything unfolding in front of our eyes, like you're saying, through social media. And I think that combination of being able to see the truth in its raw form in terms of what's actually happening, and then combining it with trying to learn more about the situation, to find out why we find ourselves in this mess in the first place, with that lack of fear and lack of inferiority complex. I think in your generation, particularly. I mean, Farhan, I think you'll agree that we have high hopes from your generation in particular. Because we're getting quite old. We've been saying the same thing for a little while now.
Mm.
We've seen how the Ummah has changed as well, alhamdulillah, and we see that there is a glimmer of hope. We see the Ummah rising, we see the Ummah waking up. And although it's taken a genocide and many more for us to get to that situation, alhamdulillah, at least we are in this situation where we can have certain conversations where the thinking is shifting. And hopefully, if that trajectory keeps going in the right direction, people will be asking the right questions in order to find the right answers, in order to find that solution that will bring an end to this terrible, terrible, I don't even know the word anymore to use. I'm
Yeah,
saying genocide, but I mean,
yeah.
there is no other word that can
I just
capture.
call it mass murder now. I don't even call it genocide because there's so much like ridiculous discussion about should we call it a genocide? Does it fit under the
I know, it's
definition of a
distracting.
genocide? It's like,
Yeah,
okay, well, let's call it mass murder. Do we agree that it's mass murder? Do we agree that it's, I mean, it's
yeah,
so ridiculous.
yeah.
I was going to say about about young people. Um, I think for young people, uh, you're really lucky because you have a level of inhibition that we don't that's for us it's we don't have that anymore. But why? Because life ties you down. This is why we're talking about sacrifices. Life does tie you down. So it's one of those things where when speaking to university students, especially because they're depending on what they're studying, and they're obviously going down certain routes and stuff, is that number one, use your time. This is the time. This is the time to think and explore and do. Yeah, but you're never going to get this time again until you get tied down. The second thing is about your learning experience is about it's always about how you're going to plug back into the system. And what I tell my children is whatever you're going to study, make sure you do it so that you can be beneficial for the ummah. And I don't just mean generally, I mean post liberation, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us that Islam will come back and that the Muslim world will be liberated, and they're going to need strategists, they're going to need leadership, they're going to need thinkers, they're going to need doers. And this is going to come from the young generation, inshallah, right? And the other thing is that sort of on that note as well is the fact that all of these people that you get in, like these in the government institutions and stuff, like for example John Kerry, that's his name, John Kerry in the US. He used to be an activist in his youth, imagine. And this is the guy who's now who's sat in the White House, and basically was full front with like US foreign policy and their interference all over the globe, including the wars that took place in the Middle East. Yet he was an activist in his youth. So can you see how the system can take your
Potential.
energy, your potential, your education, everything you've learned. They'll manipulate it, they'll suck you back into the system, and they'll make you believe that you're doing something good for the world. And this is something that the Palestinians were told as well, which is if you become NGOs, if you choose this, if you go through this route, if you go through that route, if you write letters here, if you write letters there, if you do this, then this is how you're going to get your state, and this is how you're going to get your liberation. Really, what it ended up with is a genocide. So after all of that, what did it come down to? And the Palestinians are the most educated, one of the most educated. I think Iraqis are like, comes close second, or the same. I don't know. So, so I would say that for Muslims, you need to go back to Islam, and you need to actually look at Islam as start looking at it through a political prism, and start looking at why was it so important that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam built a constitution and built a state in Medina. What was that about? The second thing is about the fact that Islam has been tried and tested. We have a 1400-year history, ups and downs, absolutely, like with any kind of civilization. However, it doesn't come close to anything that we've seen under a secular world order. Like nothing doesn't even come close. And the other thing is about having that confidence as well. That inshallah, that if we have the confidence to do whatever it is within our capacity, and also collectively as well, and we need to look for these spaces as well. Yeah. Then inshallah Allah will help us move things forward, because even with this disaster that we are in, there has been an awakening as well in so many ways, and I can't see us turning back, and therefore you can't turn a blind eye. You have to have your eyes wide open, and you have to look forward,
Inshallah.
basically, and you have to see, and you have to look for that truth, and that truth can only lie in what Islam has to say.
Absolutely.
Inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. I think on that note, make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us that wisdom, He gives us the ability, and the courage, and the opportunities to be part of the bigger plan of the liberation of Palestine. And like you said, we know it's been prophesied that Palestine will be free. So we hope, inshallah, that it's in our lifetime. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He accepts whatever efforts we're making, and that He gives us the courage to make extra effort, that we are able to go beyond our comfort zones, and to do what is necessary in terms of our duty as Muslims, and educate ourselves. Definitely, I think it's really important to know history, to really decolonize our minds, to understand the wider political picture in which all of these events are happening, so that we understand how we can then fit in to the solution to bring about an end to this occupation. So Jazakallah khair, both of you, for discussing this with me today. I hope, inshallah, that the audience takes away something positive from this, something to really think about, and all of us question ourselves first and foremost, but then group together collectively, working locally, strategizing in a sensible way, but then adding to the global call as well, to the global Muslim call, in any way, shape, and form that we can, in order to strengthen the call for the right solution, so that Palestine can be liberated. Okay, so we'll end there. Jazakallah khair, everybody. Until next time, take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.